Welcome to Home Gym History, produced by Garage Gym Radio. My name is Rob, and in addition to Home Gym History, you can find more strength history and vintage weight restorations on my YouTube channel, Vintage Weights PGH. With me tonight is natural pro bodybuilder Scott Bargisen. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here and nice to finally see you face to face.
Yeah, I mean, we've connected on Instagram and kind of messaged back and forth and done that whole social media dance. And speaking of that, meeting people face-to-face that you know online is a great time at Home Gym Con. And when this episode drops, we'll have about a month, maybe 5 weeks to go until Home Gym Con. It's April 14th through the 16th in beautiful French Lick, Indiana. And you can head to GarageGymExperiment.com. There'll be a link in the description of this episode. And you can save 10% by typing in code VINTAGE on your tickets. All right, I got that little promotion out of the way, Scott. So what are we actually going to talk about tonight? Not that I don't care. I'm really excited about Home Gym Con. I'll be heading there. Well, this is what we're going to get into, listeners. Steroids and performance-enhancing drug history. We're not actually going to get into the drugs. That would be against what a natural bodybuilder like Scott would be doing and against what I am doing in terms of home gym use. But we're going to be talking about it and the history of it with strength sports, as well as the modern day, what it entails to be a natural pro bodybuilder and what's that lifestyle like and how does that relate to a home gym owner and an everyday lifter. So starting out, could you just give us a little background about yourself, Scott, in terms of your bodybuilding and just personal history, whatever you want to share?
Yeah, certainly. So the origins of my individual sports, I guess you could say, I started out with wrestling basically as soon as I could walk. I come from a wrestling background, wrestling family, multiple state champions in the family, grew up around state champions in the Emerson and Oltapan area. So I always enjoyed the sport. I did pretty well myself, but after a few head injuries, my neurologist actually told me to switch over to football. So then I started playing football in high school and made it to college, made it to a D3 school on scholarship. And from there, I just decided that carrying all that weight, I was a defensive lineman, carrying all that weight just wasn't good for my body. So I decided to look back into the annals of my sports history and got into bodybuilding. Of course, I grew up around like the golden era bodybuilders of the time. So people like Frank Zane, Serge Nubret, Mike Menser, Dave Draper, and Rick Drayson specifically. I loved watching Rick Drayson's podcast when I was in high school. And I decided to look at NPC shows. But then at my school, one of my RAs was actually Angelo Prince, a pretty big OCB pro currently, and a multiple-time champion. Great guy. He actually introduced me into natural bodybuilding. And the more I dove into it, the better and better it looked and the better and better I felt about it. So I did my first couple of shows with the PNBA with a promoter who's currently in ownership of the Mr. America, Mark Torriello. And it's just been paradise ever since I got into the sport. I feel like every single time that I compete, things get better. I feel better. I look better. And with that, I'm able to educate people on the importance of physical health as well as the aesthetic side of things. So it's not just a matter of being big and looking good, but also feeling really good.
Hey, I mean, that resonates with me because it's as a middle-aged man, a father, husband with a home gym. Yeah, I want to, look good. I want to work out. I mean, I didn't get this sweet mustache for those of you not watching, for those of you listening, for nothing. But it's actually for a costume party this weekend.
Fair
but
enough.
In any case, Ted Lasso.
I feel bad that I didn't grow mine out for the podcast. I usually, for everybody watching, my calling card is a big handlebar mustache that I keep on my face because of the classic style. I always enjoyed the bronze and silver era bodybuilders and the classic circus strongmen. So I always decided to grow out the mustache for my competitions, and it's just been part of the look ever since.
And that resonates with me. I think that's cool. A little calling card plus homage to the people that came before you. Well, in any case, I get it, the whole wanting to feel good and look good kind of aspect of things, because if I go a little too hard in the gym and I'm torn up and I can't even help out my little girl's soccer team, limping on the sidelines, that's not a good thing. So when it comes to steroids and performance-enhancing drugs, PEDs, they're nothing new. They've been around for quite a long time. What do you know about the history of them? And I've done kind of a little research myself, so no pressure
Yeah.
here, but can you fill in any of the history for us?
So some of the small parts that I know, at least within bodybuilding specifically, I know that testosterone and exogenous testosterone has been around since around 1935, around 1936, somewhere in that area. But it wasn't available to the general public at that time just because of how expensive it was, how difficult it was to procure and produce. So really, it's been a general consensus that enhanced bodybuilding wouldn't reach the general public until like the late 50s, early 60s with the invention of Dianabol. It wasn't so much at the point of TRT usage or HGH, which would be happening down the line in around the 80s, or even Trenbolone, which would happen in the early 80s. And that's where you would get those really like sliced up, cut up pictures of like Franco Columbu or Arnold Schwarzenegger, like these guys who just have ridiculous conditioning. But I feel like the early 50s is really the last time that you see natural bodybuilding take the stage until the late 90s, where you get these natural organizations.
Well, that's, there's a lot to unpack there. You know quite a bit. So as far as what I've been able to figure out, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, there's some stuff that I read and stuff that I found prior to the 1930s, like in the 1840s, a German physiologist and zoologist studying the endocrine system of birds and doing various things. And also, I mean, way back in ancient times, in terms of testosterone, the ancient Greeks would eat animal testicles before the Olympics, and legendarily that would help their performance. Now, this is all ancient history and legendarily, so how authentic of a scientific marker is that? I don't know, but it's a pretty cool story. But, as you said, what I did find were a lot of differing opinions when it comes to about the period of 1935 to 1950 as to, okay, were they taking steroids? Were they not taking steroids? And they, who I'm referring to would be bodybuilders. Were they taking them? Were they not taking them? In 1939, two scientists that had come up with the synthesized version of testosterone would win the Nobel Prize. So this is a lauded and kind of publicized thing. And 1940 would be the year that the world would finally acknowledge the effects of testosterone, and the Soviet Union athletes may or may not have started using them. And then in the 1950s, in the Olympics in 1954, Russian weightlifters, it said, were given testosterone. Bob Hoffman from York supposedly had noticed a marked difference between the Olympic Games with the Russians. Like, whoa, they really made a lot of gains here in just a 4-year period of time. Oh, yeah. And funnily enough, I find it funny at least, he thought that he actually, Bob Hoffman, the owner of York, didn't think it was steroids. He was really big on his high protein shake that he was pushing at the time. So he was actually kind of denying it at first, like, oh no, like it couldn't have been that. But then we get to the late 50s and we get to Dianabol, which you mentioned, and Dr. Ziegler, 1958, with anabolic steroids. So Dianabol, that was oral, I believe, an oral steroid. Mm-hmm. And then that's where things really start kicking off, and you've got this, explosion in terms of bodybuilders and their height to weight ratio and just how expansive they are in terms of their musculature. So then you mentioned right now, modern times, you have the tested, I don't even know the phrase that you used. How did you phrase it? The natural bodybuilding associations or the tested associations? What's the proper phrase?
So that's also become a little bit of a controversial topic in the tested community as well, because we're trying to get to the point where all bodybuilding is bodybuilding, but then you have different denominations, which is the untested federations and the tested federations. Some people want to call the untested federations enhanced federations, but then that also has the connotation of, oh, everybody is using, and there are no natural athletes, like everybody's untested, so therefore everyone's on it. But that's not really the case. There are some natural athletes that do compete in the NPC or the IFBB or the IFBBPA, but the tested organizations are the ones that truly have drug testing through urinalysis, blood tests, even lie detector tests, polygraph tests with some organizations.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's some controversy with that too, but it seems like the unifying piece is urinalysis, making sure that testosterone levels are within the healthy normal range. No TRT is being used, no exogenous prescription grade steroids are being used, and everyone has a little bit more of a level playing field in the sport.
That makes sense to me in terms of, okay, the terminology that if we say enhanced, well, that has the connotation that every single person participating is using some type of PED. So I get that. Whereas on the flip side, with the tested, you can, with the right ramifications, say, okay, everybody's been tested. We are all natural pro bodybuilders. Yep. So then when it comes to some of that, just to be clear, steroids and other performance-enhancing drugs, they are illegal currently in the United States, correct? I'm pretty sure.
So many of them are. Many of them are. So things like dianabol, trenbolone, clenbuterol, all these things are completely illegal. They're too strong. But then you can go into something like a CVS pharmacy or a regular supplement store and grab something called prohormones, which are going to be testosterone boosters or estrogen blockers that are within a certain healthy range where it can be considered a health supplement rather than an exogenous steroid. So it still gives you some of the effects without many of the side effects that you may see from more extreme steroids, but they're still designer steroids. They're designer hormones that can be sold at a relatively high price without all of the results that you may get. Think of like your Nugenics or like T boosters, things like that.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
I've seen some commercials. You know, YouTube has apparently identified in the algorithm that I would be in the market for such things, even though I'm not. So, you know, I think what's interesting is this delineation between the two, and I think it was 1990 that the act was passed that made steroids illegal. And the United States, at least, not in other countries. And in the United States since then, trafficking became a federal offense from a misdemeanor, and then even just possession became illegal. But then on the other hand, you mentioned just walking into your local, pharmacy and picking up kind of a lower grade of it. So then how does that play a part in natural bodybuilding? Would those kind of like over the counter enhancers, would that tip the scale too much that you potentially would fail a test?
So the nice thing with many of these tested organizations is that most of them tend to follow the same guidelines and rules. So take something like the PNBA, the Mr. America, or the OCB. They all follow a relatively close list that's along the same guidelines as the World Anti-Doping Agency, also known as WADA. WADA is also used for the Olympics, for the NFL, UFC. All these major organizations still use WADA as their primary benchmark for any kind of drug testing. So any exogenous hormones, anabolic steroids, stimulants, diuretics, like all these different substances that may lead to a certain performance enhancement or distraction of enhancement performance-wise can cause a tripped drug test, whether through urinalysis, blood test, or even something like a hair test. Like a follicle test was used for THC consumption when cannabis was used as a illegal substance for WADA. Yeah.
So, I mean, and WADA is the World Anti-Doping Agency, listeners. So essentially, a big turning point was in 1975, the International Olympic Committee, they added anabolic steroids to its list of banned substances. And although the IOC is different than the IFBB or some of the other federations that Scott's mentioning, that had a trickle-down effect in terms of how the rest of competitive sports viewed steroids from then on. And then 1990, as I mentioned, we have the Anabolic Steroid Act. 9 years later, in 1999, WADA is formed. And that's what Scott was just referring to, this independent agency. It was formed through the IOC, but it's an independent agency that's their whole name of the game, is just testing and anti-doping. So when it comes to steroid use in bodybuilding, as opposed to other sports, the first thing I thought about was Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, because when I read it several years ago, it just stood out to me a little bit that the constant refrain throughout, at least the version that I had, I'll see if I can grab it here, So yeah, I've got this fairly modern version with the silver cover here. Yeah, fully updated and revised. So the constant refrain was that basically bodybuilding was everybody's doing steroids, and bodybuilding, at least according to Arnold, was targeted and was, receiving the brunt, if you will, of negative attention for steroids. Now, Arnold, throughout it, he paints a negative picture of steroids. He has a whole section about dangers of steroids. So he's not quite promoting them, but on the other hand, he is taking that stance that bodybuilding had this over vilification as compared to baseball and some other sports. What's your take on that in 2023? How does that stand?
So in the year 2023, with the massive information that people seem to have based on their internet doctors, their massive personalities, the Rick Draysons, the Rich Pianas, even some of these modern bodybuilders are starting to come to terms and be a little bit more open about their use of anabolic chicken that it used to be back in like the late 2000s, 2010s. There was a lot of taboo around taking, but steroid use in the modern day seems to be less and less important because you're aiming for the result. Taking a massive powerlifter in the USPA untested division and the thousands of pounds that they're moving, the amount of strength that they have, or taking a modern IFBB open bodybuilder, a classic physique guy, they're just gigantic. Like a classic physique guy in the modern era would absolutely wipe the floor with anybody in the 70s or 80s, anybody. And it's all because of these leaps and bounds in chemistry. Now, when it comes to the public perception of natural bodybuilding in comparison to untested bodybuilding, we're looked at as small, skinny, tiny, normal, attainable, whereas the IFBB guys, these untested powerlifters, these untested weightlifters, strongmen, it's a freak show to the greatest degree, and it almost becomes more of a chemistry experiment rather than something that is a marvel to look at. Like many of these open bodybuilders going on stage at 280 pounds with 3% body fat or sometimes lower, it's not something that people want. It's just something that people want to see and marvel at and be grossed out by almost. Like
it's the attraction of seeing something so unique in terms of like, this is not the everyday person walking down the street or even the, extraordinary person walking down the street. This is like 1 in 10 type of people.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, I could see that. I mean, what I got curious about was in terms of moving through the history of performance enhancing drugs and bodybuilding, just the size to weight ratio of things. So if you go back to like Steve Reeves in the 1950s and you work your way all the way up and through, and we've got the first Mr. Olympia, Larry Scott. So that's 1965. That means steroids are widely available by that point. Larry Scott's training with Vince Gironda, the guru, and he's a guru of a lot more than just a preacher curl. So, and Larry Scott, I'm pretty sure, has since, like you just referenced, many bodybuilders have, after the years of it being taboo, now have come out and said, oh yeah, I use steroids. And 70s, we've got Sergio and Arnold. And Arnold's the tallest of this crew at 6'2". And he was clocking in at a weight of about, I think, 225, 230, something like that. So then 1992, in walks Dorian Yates and the Mass Monsters, who's 5'9" and 270 pounds. So in my, very loose opinion, that's a real turning point. Like, holy guacamole, 270 pounds at 5'9". And then Ronnie Coleman wins the Olympia at 297, and he's only 1 inch taller than Dorian. He's 5'10". Carrying around almost 300 pounds at 5'10", and having, like you mentioned, next to no body fat, that is, that's otherworldly. So there is a shock value there that I'll admit, I look at videos of Ronnie Coleman and I'm like, oh my gosh, lightweight, like, oh, look at this dude.
Yeah, buddy.
So then, that's right. So When it comes to my personal history, though, I grew up in that kind of you don't talk about it era. So when I looked at like Flex Magazine or whatever, I just mistakenly, like a lot of other high school kids probably at the time, thought, oh, well, if I follow this program, I'm going to look like that. And it never worked out. I'm still trying. So thankfully, mention his name again. Who was the high school teacher or coach that you had that put you on this path?
Oh, sorry about that. I lost you for a second. The high school coach that got me into bodybuilding, or
yes.
So it actually wasn't one of my
mentioned.
coaches. It was my uncle Anthony. He introduced.
Oh, okay.
So my uncle Anthony
your
Peterson.
uncle.
He's a world record,
nice,
lifelong drug-free power lifter.
That's awesome.
I believe he still currently holds a New Jersey state record in the equipped bench press for the WNPF.
Wow.
Very strong man. Once again, 5'9", about 330 when he got the record. Crazy strong. He was benching in the fives, like sick man. But we watched Pumping Iron together growing up, and when I was in high school, he would always like send over links of the Rick Drayson podcast or the Rich Piana podcast, some of their YouTube videos, things that they were doing. So every single morning when I was getting ready for football or getting ready for school, I'd be eating a box of cereal, drinking a gallon of milk, eating a dozen eggs. Good morning. Welcome to the Rich Piana Show. 5% nutrition. And just watching that every single morning, I was like, I'm 260 pounds. I can squat that much. And then I eventually was able to squat massive amounts of weight. As a drug-free guy, it was pretty cool. But I knew that I was never going to have that amount of size, that amount of leanness at the weight that I was at. But my body definitely paid the price for it. But I'm happy that I was able to.
See, I didn't have that uncle. I mean, I have uncles, but they certainly didn't burst my bubble and say, my father at one point, I remember saying to me, like, they're on steroids. Like, and I didn't believe him. I was like, no, like, look, it tells you right here, like, these are the exercises.
Yep.
So I was in a blissful, like, whatever I was, 14 or 15-year-old state of ignorance at the time. But my perception of it, it might just be me personally, is that there's a lot more, as you said, a lot more talk about performance enhancing drugs, even just in a jokey way or in memes or things like that. Just on social media, I see plenty of references to trend, plenty of references to everything under the sun. So, how does that impact being a natural pro bodybuilder, just the amount that people in the strength sports world will talk about performance enhancing drugs?
So I've definitely found in the last couple of years, specifically since COVID, that a lot more people come up to me and say, hey, so what are you taking? A lot of people since COVID, even before COVID, when I was first competing in 2019, people wouldn't come up to me and just blatantly ask what I was on. Like they would usually ask, oh, what kind of exercises do you do for chest? Like normal things, educational. But in recent times, in the last year or so, I have a lot of, like my high school students, I have a lot of kids around the gym, people in their early 20s, they'll come up to me and say, hey, so you're making a lot of gains. You're looking really good. You're getting nice and lean. So what kind of diuretics are you doing? I'm like, I'm not taking diuretics. I'm just eating well. And they're like, no, it can't be that. And I'm not a big guy. Right now, I'm at about 191, 192. When I was in high school, I was walking around at 260 and nobody was asking me if I was on GOS. But now I just get a little bit lean and all of a sudden I'm on steroids, when it's just a matter of putting in the work to get enough sleep, get the right food in, drink enough water, train the right way. And all of a sudden it's like all of my hard work is being discounted and discredited because you could just start taking Anavar and cut up a little bit.
Yeah, I can imagine that is frustrating. And I mean, that is a misconception, I think, sometimes about performance enhancing drugs, is that like, boop, now you're humongous. I mean, they do lift big weights. They do put in a lot of work. It's just that they also have that chemistry that you mentioned involved, helping with the amount of work they can put in and recover from. So then in terms of your choices and involving performance enhancing drugs and steroids, was there ever a point that you got frustrated or tempted? Like, maybe I'll make the turn. Maybe I'll turn the corner. Or have you just always been on the straight and narrow path?
Going to the dark side. But I've never been tempted to take steroids. I've been goaded into it. I've been told many a time, like, oh, you have so much potential. You have a great frame. Why don't you just try going on TRT or trying HGH for a few months, or even trying something light? Like, Try DMAA. Try using a stimulant that you haven't used before as your pre-workout. Maybe you'll get a little something out of it. But it's just not something that I want to do to my body. It's not worth the risks of how it's going to change my body's chemistry, my physicality, and my makeup in order to get an extra pound of muscle growth in a year, or more percent body fat drop with a little bit of extra food in my body. I'd rather walk around lean at showtime around like 180, 185 and look as good as I do. I mean, not to toot my horn, I'm going by what the judges said, but to look as lean as I do without the drugs and still have something that's attainable and desirable by the general public. Like I want to be a good role model for people that are not only in the sport, but also for people that I work with at my normal day job. I'm a high school English teacher. And I'm at an all-boys school, nationally ranked in athletics for most of our sports, if not all of our sports. And I see on a daily basis that many kids are driven to taking TRT, driven to taking HGH. Even if they don't play a single snap on the football field and they're playing on the bench, they feel like if they take these exogenous substances that'll give them that edge. And it's sad to see the changes that are being made in such a short period of time and how it's affecting their bodies. Like you have these kids that are just complaining about stomach aches and things like that when it's because they're taking too high of a dosage of something that they read on the internet. And they're just kind of self-medicating.
So then that's where I think we're in an interesting age, because you bring up the internet, this 20, 30, 40 years ago, this was just like, when I was growing up, there was always this image of like this kind of sketchy dude at the gym that, would approach you and, sell you steroids.
It's always like an old bloody duffel bag.
Yeah, like that's the image I had in my head. Like I can remember being in health class and I can remember them talking about steroids and the dangers of steroids. And I can remember this like image in my head of like, oh man, I got to watch out for that guy when I go to the gym. But in reality now with the internet, I mean, you can just hop on YouTube and find any information you want. You can hop on any number of websites that can give you all kinds of information. Not that I'm encouraging it, but I'm just saying that the accessibility of information has changed. And when it comes to anyone, whether it's youth or young athletes that are out of high school or college, using any type of performance enhancing drug, the information's, I would argue, much more accessible now than it used to be. So when it comes to the dangers, you've mentioned a couple times, like dangers and things of that. When it comes to your personal, take on things, what stands out to you? Like what, in terms of side effects or dangers, things of that nature that you're like, yeah, that's where, even if I was tempted, this is why I wouldn't cross over into things.
So there's actually a couple of main reasons. So one, just the amount of stress that it puts on your organs is well documented. And as much as people may want to shove their heads into the sand about it, it does cause like extenuous amounts of stress onto your liver, heart, kidneys, even your intestines, things like that. But also, I'm part of the belief system that if you're walking around at 300 pounds, it doesn't matter if it's muscle or fat, your body more than likely can't handle it unless you're 6'7" or higher. Many people seem to have this belief that carrying around an extra amount of muscle is healthier than carrying around an extra amount of fat. I was originally a physical therapy major in college, and I had a really good relationship. I'm going to shout out my anatomy and physiology professor from college right now, Dr. Larry Corpus.
Nice.
And what a brilliant name that he had. We would constantly talk about body composition because he was interested in my bodybuilding. I was just starting out with the training, and I'd be asking him questions about body composition and about the enlargement and growth of the organs specifically, because my heart is slightly enlarged just from all the athletics that I've done and the extra cardiovascular requirements that I needed for my athletics. It's normal for athletes. But he would always talk about and reference the fact that 1 pound of body fat will add 1 mile of blood vessels. 1 mile.
Wow.
1 pound. And a pound of body fat may only be like a 2-inch by 2-inch cube, or a 3-inch by 3-inch cube, somewhere around there, and it's a pound. That's 1 mile of capillaries, veins, arteries that you're adding onto the stress of your heart. It's 1 more mile that the blood needs to travel. It's 1 more mile of tissues that vitamins and minerals need to go to. So maintaining that amount of size, whether it's through muscle or fat, is still dangerous. You could only assume that having muscle is only going to require more minerals, more blood, more oxygen, more carbon dioxide removal, more sugars, more glycogen use, and also consequently more creatine usage in order to adequately and effectively use that carb source effectively. But yeah, I think that adding exogenous substances and putting your body into a superhuman state of size is just as dangerous as somebody who has like a binge eating disorder or some other kind of food, like a thyroid disorder where extra weight may be carried or kept and weight loss is more difficult. Scary to see.
Well, I think it's, you mentioned just organs and things of that nature. And I've seen, this is not from deep research. This is straight from like, you know, just swiping through reels or whatever. But I've seen like, I'm trying to think of the term for it, like the bubble gut of some of the professional bodybuilders that may be enhanced that then, you know, they can't really do a vacuum much anymore. And, you know, I'm guessing that's from some of the things that you're talking about. You know, when it comes to trying to monitor your health and things of that nature, I've seen various people that were arguing for performance enhancing drugs, whether it's in Bigger, Faster, Stronger, or whether it's on various other, I think Vice had a really great couple videos on steroids and things of that nature. I'll drop those in the link, talking about how, well, I get my blood tested and, you know, so don't worry, I get my blood tested. But, you know, it's interesting what you're mentioning, though, that like that's not quite enough to monitor everything, all of these different things that might be happening with your body. So it's you know, it's definitely something that would weigh on my mind when it comes to why, besides just the obvious of trying to put on that muscle mass for the purpose of bodybuilding. I think about home gym owners and just everyday lifters, because I'm willing to bet that some of my listeners out there, they're using various things that aren't exactly over the counter. And I started thinking to myself as this recording session with you was coming up, like, I wonder why they're doing that. And I wonder what motivates it. So what do you think? Is it just purely aesthetic? Why do you think someone who's not in bodybuilding competitions would turn to performance enhancing drugs?
So the interesting thing about modern usage of performance enhancing drugs, especially in the home gym community, as I'm part of the home gym community too, I find that many people that are just like daily lifters, they're trying to get bigger, they're trying to feel better, look better in their clothes. It's not performance enhancing drugs. It's youth rejuvenation, TRT, and HGH therapy that you get from the doctor. It's going to an endocrinologist and asking for a TRT prescription. You fast through the morning so that when you get your testosterone taken, you're down. You're spiked all the way down as low as you can possibly go. You're down to like 85 parts per million or maybe 100 parts per million. And that puts you about 300 units below the average. So then they just spike you up with weekly injections with HGH and testosterone. And then you feel amazing. You feel great. Your body is getting better. And you're looking 5 years younger without getting all that much done. But then you also have to get a new pair of shoes because you went from a size 11 to a size 12. You have to get a new pair of pants because you went from a size 30 waist to a size 34 because your pelvis is getting bigger and your organs are getting bigger. And that's when you start seeing the bubble gut. It's from low dosages of HGH and TRT and not maintaining it in a healthy manner that often leads to at least the common man getting that kind of bubble gut kind of look while still having good muscle. Yeah, HGH and TRT are becoming more and more commonplace, not only for the 30-somethings and 40-somethings, but I have friends that are my age and younger who have been on TRT since they were 17.
And how old are you?
Yeah.
Wow. So, yeah, I mean, that's... I was trying to look for some credible sources. I went to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and they maintained, and this is a quote, most anabolic steroid users are male, non-athletes, aiming to improve their appearance by building muscle, and use of steroids is strongly tied to a male body image disorder called muscle dysmorphia. So, you know, that's just one take on it, but it made me think a lot about just the history of strength sports and masculinity. And there's always, I would argue, been a relationship between culture's perception of masculinity and strength sports and vice versa. But here in the 2000s and 2023, where does that stand? You know, it's an interesting thing. So we've got these tested bodybuilding competitions. you could perceive that as being a harder struggle than the opposite because you're not enhanced. So it depends how you look at it. But from what you're telling me, that's probably the smaller view, because you're saying that most people are saying, oh, come on, like you're so skinny, you're attainable, as you said. Well, I'll pay you a compliment that even if it's attainable, it looks like a lot of work. So where I'm going with this is, what does it take? So if all of a sudden I decide, you know what, I'm in my mid-20s and I decide that I've been working out for a while, why don't I give bodybuilding a shot? Or in my case, I'm in my early 40s, but still, maybe there's a master's division or something I can shoot for. What's it take to naturally get to a competitive level?
So the nice thing about natural bodybuilding is it's as simple can be. You don't have to worry about chemistry. You don't have to worry about all that much when it comes to your liver damage or anything like that, or your kidneys being overworked. It's a matter of making sure that you keep your blood work in order. You're getting the right amount of vitamins and minerals that you need, and you slowly increase your calorie deficit over a long period of time to maintain as much muscle mass as you can. So in my case, and in many of my coaches' cases, my coach, Craig Yarnell, world-class coach, excellent prep coach, programmer. He's coached many champions. He's of the mindset that you diet down over the course of 6 to 7 months. For example, my prep will be starting around St. Patrick's Day, getting ready for the September show, the Yorton Cup down in North Carolina with the OCB. Very excited for that. It should be a good time. But, you want to try to...
That's dedication,
So it's half a year of minimizing the cake, minimizing the cookies, the pizza, things like that. Of course, you can have it once in a while as long as you factor it into your macros, but many coaches have different mindsets when it comes to that. But the overall idea of maintaining good sleep patterns, good food patterns, drinking enough water, and training the right way, preventing injury, it's simple enough. It's just a matter of making it more of a Groundhog Day kind of mentality where every day is exactly the same, and the only thing that's going to change is that it gets a little bit worse every day when it comes to the food. But
gotcha. I like that, the Groundhog Day mentality. So when it comes to the testing and things of that nature, I think you mentioned early on, there's some differences from federation to federation. So where do you compete? What federation do you compete in, or do you compete in multiple?
So I do compete in multiple federations. I currently have my pro card officially with the PNBA INBA, which is considered to be one of the oldest tested federations. I also compete with the OCB, founded by Chet Yorton, once again, one of the oldest natural federations that's out there. And Chet Yorton being the father of natural bodybuilding and one of the few people to beat Arnold Schwarzenegger back in 1966. He's considered to be a proper drug-free bodybuilder and natural athlete. And I also compete at the Mr. America, which has recently received massive influx of athletes and sponsors. It's become a big sports expo. It's sort of turning into the biggest natural sports festival in the world at the moment. As of right now, it looks like Mark is putting together an amazing show with many different sports, including boxing, strongman, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting, arm wrestling, and of course, bodybuilding. So I'm excited to see how that will go.
Nice.
But federations like the PNBA, they strictly do in-season and off-season urinalysis. I haven't witnessed any off-season urinalysis, but I have heard of some cases where athletes will voluntarily give themselves up for urinalysis testing. In the OCB, they incorporated another deterrent for untested or enhanced athletes. So every single athlete at every show takes a polygraph test. So this is a very controversial testing method. I personally think that it's a good idea. It's a good way to deter people. But at the same time, if you know a trick or two, you can pass it with flying colors and be lying bold-faced to the person who's running it. So it's difficult to really say without certainty how testable these people are. And then on top of that, the OCB always tests its winners and at least one other random candidate within the category. Like when I won my pro card back in October with them, I was tested right off the stage. Like I got my trophy, I walked off stage, and the promoter came up.
I was going to ask about that. Like, what's the procedure? Yeah. What happens? So you got your trophy, and then come with me.
So you get
Mr.
your trophy,
Bargisen.
You shake the beautiful model's hand that hands you the trophy. You come off stage, and the promoter grabs you by the shoulder with a cup in hand and goes, "Let's go take a leak. Let's go to the bathroom." They go right into the nearest urinal.
Yeah.
And Some federations will have the tester watch as you go to the restroom, just in case you pull out a fake one and use fake urine or somebody else's urine. But
sure.
Thankfully, some are a little bit more lax. Of course, I was in front of him, but he didn't want to watch. Thankfully, it could be a little bit of a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
But urinalysis went through. Yeah.
I'm a veteran, so I'm no stranger to urinalysis. I mean, the U.S. military does plenty of urinalysis. And I weirdly would get nervous. I get anxious about it. And my wife would remind me once I was married. I was married for, I guess, half of my career. She would remind me, like, Rob, you don't do anything. Like, what are you nervous about? And I don't know why. It would just make me nervous. So that leads to my next question, which is, what are you allowed to, what is an acceptable supplement? What kind of supplements and things do you use? What is within the range of a tested natural pro bodybuilder's, regimen in terms of what you're taking in?
So for most companies, protein supplements are okay. Most pre-workouts, non-stim or stimulant, are totally okay. Creatine monohydrate is absolutely fine. For anybody that says that taking creatine is unnatural, stop eating beef or chicken or any other meat product because you're taking in creatine. The big thing is tainted supplements and making sure that you're reading the nutrition labels of your supplements. For example, there are still some pre-workout supplements that are out there that use DMHA and DMAA. These are methyl stimulants, and these have been banned by WADA for years and are actually considered to be illegal in the United States to produce or even or to sell to the public. So many of these people with 2011 formula Jack 3D, they're carrying an illicit substance, or like old school Mr. Hyde. Once again, totally illegal. But for the most part, you can walk into any GNC or any vitamin shop or Pumped Up Sups down in Miami. You can walk into any of those spots and you can find just normal supplements. So like your C4 is fine, normal raw protein powder is fine, 110% pre-workouts, totally fine. But it's just making sure that you're keeping an eye on the list, making sure that you're not taking in any substances that could be banned. So like pro-hormones, illegal stimulants, steroids, diuretics, especially. Diuretics have become really big.
Well, that's where, it's not, I don't know whether is a diuretic considered a performance enhancing drug or not. I guess it is. It's a drug and it's enhancing your performance as a bodybuilder. So diuretics, I mean, I've heard of this. It's basically to get shredded, right? It's as you're getting the water weight off before the competition. Is that the process?
The origins of diuretics as a PED actually originate in Olympic weightlifting and combat sport. Specifically wrestling, judo, boxing, so that you could make a certain weight class and then rehydrate right after the weigh-in so that you could be, say, 15, 20 pounds above what your weigh-in was. Many times you see this with the UFC. You'll see a lot of athletes that are accused of diuretics usage, especially in the lower weight classes like bantamweight, welterweight, things like in the 130 to 175 range, many people in that area. But in bodybuilding, it's exactly as you said. Many athletes are trying to get rid of the water weight, trying to tighten up the skin as close to the muscle as possible, try to bring out some extra vascularity, and really give you that skin-tight, paper-thin conditioning that's expected for high-level competition.
Gotcha. So then when it comes to testing and things like that, is there any way to test for diuretics? I mean, if you're in a tested federation, put it that way.
So there are ways to do it. Simple hydration tests can negate at about an 85% efficiency, I believe, whether diuretics were used or not in the peak process. These have been used in the IFBB ever since. In the 90s, there were a few bodybuilders that passed away as a result of diuretics usage, particularly from Germany. It seems like many German athletes were trying to get to that like paper-thin, sub 1% body fat to create this insane illusion of muscularity. But in recent years, it seems like they're becoming more and more lax with diuretics until the most recent passing of George Peterson, classic physique competitor, not even that. He was only 35, 36 years old when he passed, God rest, and he was considered to be a beacon of the sport of enhanced bodybuilding or untested bodybuilding. And I personally loved him as an athlete. I loved keeping up with him, but diuretics seem to be the cause of more deaths than just standard exogenous testosterone or steroid use. And it's that extreme dropping of body fat and body water that leads to rhabdodialysis, kidney failure, liver failure, heart failure, and leads to the deaths of people far too young.
Yeah, I mean, that's extremely sad in his 30s. Jeez. So, it sounds like, like you were saying about the lie detector test, things like that, that if you wanted to, you could probably get around some of these things. You could probably still mess with things somewhat. But as you mentioned, when you win, you're tested. So as far as the steroids and things of that nature, that's probably going to pop on a urinalysis. When it comes to home gym use and home gym lifters, you had mentioned that you've lifted in a home gym. So making it to a professional level, making it to getting your pro card, is it possible in a home gym? I mean, in your case, it was. So what's the balance of that? I mean, would you caution people against sticking in their home gym? Would you say, yeah, go for it? What would be your advice for them?
That's a complicated question. So my personal home gym is completely dependent on how good the weather is that day. So my home gym is actually in my backyard under a tent. It's beautiful in the summer and wonderful in the fall, but the second that there's a little bit of rain, a little bit of precipitation of any kind, terrible. But in the middle of the summer, there's nothing nicer than going out into my backyard, squatting 405 for a couple, throwing my different barbell on, putting it on my back, and doing lunges while my dogs are doing laps in the backyard. So much fun. But I would say that it's absolutely possible to get your pro card at any age when it comes to having a home gym. If anything, it makes it a little bit easier depending on the equipment that you have. I personally have a pretty decked out home gym. I built it over the summer. I have about 1,000 pounds worth of plates. I most recently got a set of Rep Fitness Equalizer plates and the 100-pound plates from Strength Co. just because they're 100-pound plates. I don't really use them for anything but deadlifts. But boy, are they cool to use. I would say, so like having a good barbell, a good hex barbell of some kind, or a transformer bar of some kind, a well-established weight stack of at least 400 pounds if you're a male athlete, or even a female athlete if you're using it for squats, deadlifts, and hip thrusts, and having some kind of easy curl bar or adjustable dumbbells just to kind of add a little bit of accessory work. And if you can fit it, having some kind of cable stack is so helpful. It's good for any kind of isolation movements, doing like unilateral work or bilateral work if you're able to do it, if you have the space. Many of the specialty machines that I've been seeing on the home gym market are getting better and better at even greater price points. I'm sure you've seen the same.
As far as fitting it into your home gym, I'll drop a name here. My surplus strength system, it's awesome. It's just really, it attaches to the surplus strength. I'm talking about their cable system. It attaches to your rack, and there you go. You just saved yourself some room, because real estate, man, in the home gym, it gets eaten up pretty quickly. I've only got so much room to work with. So it's a lot more stable than some of the free floating kind of do-it-yourself cable pulley type deals. So that's been a really nice addition to my home gym in terms of what I've been doing with cable pulley movements and things of that nature. Is from surplus strength. But I'll set aside my surplus strength review for another time. I'm really loving it. It's been a couple months now. But in any case, as far as going forward from here, so, you've got this home gym that you can work with. So when it's rainy, you can hit up a commercial gym. Where do you see yourself? What are your goals in terms of your bodybuilding career here? I mean, Mr. America, in your sights, you mentioned you have competition in September. I forget the name of it.
So in September, I'm going to be competing at the OCB Yorton Cup. That's their world championships for all their pros. And I was thankfully able to qualify it at my amateur show. And I'm going to be competing at the Mr. America in October. And I'm hoping to win. Okay. I'm definitely hoping to win the Mr. America. I got second place this past year at my pro debut, so I have some big shoes to fill. And I have quite a big name to beat myself. And also, Dr. Jay Wright looks fantastic. He's always so consistent. He's a fantastic representative of the sport, and he always comes in dialed. So I need to make sure that I'm pulling all the stops. Yeah. But I'm looking for my first pro win. Hopefully it'll be this
Definitely.
year. So we'll have to see how this prep goes. Absolutely.
It'd be very cool. I'll be keeping up with you, and I'll be rooting for you. One last question for you would be, if any of the listeners are kind of, their interest is getting piqued by this, like, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe their perception had been only the non-tested bodybuilding, but now they're thinking, well, wait, like this natural bodybuilding, maybe that's in my future. Is there any good information sources, any good places they can go to kind of learn about it? Do the federations that you mentioned have, you know, good information on their websites? What would you advise?
So I would say that the best place to start would be the OCB's website, the OCB official page. They also have an Instagram page, a Facebook page, and they have many representatives for their various competitions. Some different athletes that you can check on Instagram or even online. Dr. Jay Wright with ChiroFit on his Instagram page. He is a fantastic resource. Derek Joe, most recent champion in the PNBA Natural Olympia. Jamal Williams, Yorton Cup champion for the OCB. And for anybody wondering, my coach, Craig Yarnell, is a wonderful resource for anything natural bodybuilding or even natural powerlifting. Him and his fiancee, Crystal Woods, have been part of the sport for a number of years, and they've shown success across many federations. They've been able to guide many athletes to greatness, pro cards, championships even. And the two of them are just a tour de force when it comes to natural bodybuilding. You will never find greater advocates for the sport than the two of them. Although, very close second would probably be Joe Lacera. He's the vice president of the ANBF. Okay. He's a former classic physique Mr. America 2020, current open bodybuilding competitor for the ANBF and the OCB. Great guy, all around, wonderful human being, and he's a fantastic advocate for the sport. So Joe Lacera, Crystal Woods, Craig Yarnell, top three names.
Nice. So head to the OCB, follow some folks on Instagram, and where can the listeners follow
my
you?
Instagram page, and my DMs are always open if you need any information. My Instagram name is Escanor Natty Pro, named after a Seven Deadly Sins character. My students, when I had the big mustache, my students said that I looked like that character from an anime, so it just stuck.
That's great. That's great. I'll make sure that we drop a link to that so that listeners, you can just click the description and you can find Scott's Instagram and check him out. And thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate coming on Home Gym History and letting us know about your career and about what we can find out with tested bodybuilding and, you know, natural pro bodybuilding.
Absolutely.
So
well,
thank you so much.
Natural bodybuilding is on the up and up, and it seems to be continuing in that direction. So let's hope it keeps that going.
Yeah. I'll be watching for you at Mr. America. So
absolutely.
keep it up.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you so much.